Notes, lights, camera, mic. Everything's on. Looks like it's healing up pretty good. All right, so today's video is gonna be a little bit different. Normally I talk about real estate, money, that type of thing, educational videos. Today's gonna be more about the construction side of the project that I'm doing right outside these walls, which is a shipping container home. We'll get to the glam site a little bit later on because I'm still waiting on materials. But let's dive into it. So right now there's a global shortage of shipping containers around the whole world. Well, that's kind of redundant because I did say global, but you guys get what I'm saying, which means that shipping containers have increased by 2 to 3 times in price just in the last half year, 6 months or so. Well, the thing that I designed, got permitted, and had engineerings do or work on contains 2 shipping containers, actually 4 shipping containers, 2 of them being 20-foot high cube, which is 9.5 feet tall instead of the standard 8 feet tall. The problem with that though is that there are literally no 20-foot high cube containers available on the West Coast or anywhere west of the Mississippi. And the ports that usually do get them, they don't even have access to them from overseas or China. And the reason behind all this is because a lot of cargo actually stopped flowing. And the companies that normally ship products back and forth, instead of cycling their shipping containers on a normal cycle and get rid of their old ones, buy new ones, instead they're holding on to their old ones and just fixing them, which halts the supply of new containers and stops the secondary supply of people like you and I who want to buy used containers to use to build our homes or rentals. So there lies the problem of what everybody who's in the shipping container business is experiencing, which sucks for me because can't really change, well, I shouldn't say that. I can change things, it would just be ridiculously expensive. So the only option I have is to make them. And surprisingly, it wasn't an outrageous amount of money. It was still expensive, but actually not too bad. Now be sure to sub to the channel right down below if you guys want to stay up to date on what's going on with the shipping container project and the glam site right outside. And if you guys are following my Instagram, you guys will know what happened here. This is actually, looks worse than it really is. It was just a training accident with a sharp thumbnail while I was rolling with my jiu-jitsu partner. It's all good though, it's healing up pretty nicely. And if you personally want to get more into real estate or short-term rentals, buying land, or building your own home, I hold consultation sessions. Details down below in the description if you want to get a hold of me and set something up. Otherwise, for the YouTube gods, hit that like button for me. And if you don't like my videos, you can also hit the like or the thumbs down. The like down, I think it helps the channel too. I don't know. So my only option in this case was to actually cut a 40-footer in half because there is actually still a steady supply, sort of 40-foot containers. The only thing is instead of paying $3,500, $3,800 for a 40-foot, I'm now paying $6,100 for a 40-foot. So to solve this dilemma, if I had bought 2 brand new 20-foot containers, it would cost me $6,000, right, like $5,500, $6,000, pretty much the same price as 40-footers. And actually maybe even a little more because they are way more rare than a 40-footer right now. So in this case, what I did is I bought a 40-foot container that had double doors on both sides because for my project, I need doors on both 20-foot containers. Now the lucky thing is the yard where I was purchasing the containers from, they actually have a full shop and I paid them just an extra $300 to cut it in half for me. Now, the only problem behind this is like, you're like, oh cool, you're saving a bunch of money. Instead of paying $12,000 for 2 20-foot shipping containers, you're now only paying $6,000 plus $300 to cut it. You're saving money. Not exactly. It's gonna take a lot of steel and a lot of welding to get it done because you do have to structurally reinforce every opening that you put in a shipping container, especially when you cut it in half. Now, the problem with shipping containers is that the majority of the strength from the containers comes from its frame, which means the 2 ends of the containers and the railings on the top and the bottom that runs along the entire length of the container. Now, when you cut it in half, not only are you suspending the rails on both top and bottom, but you also are missing out the entire picture frame structure of the end. And we have to go in there and reinforce that. So once the containers were cut in half, and I made sure that they measured it precisely because the foundation was already poured and I needed it to be as precise as possible, I had them delivered on site. Now, this sounds simple to just frame it out with some steel, but when you start working with metal instead of wood, It's one, a lot heavier, and it's a lot more difficult to work with because you're not just using hammer and nails, you're actually using a welder and a bunch of heavy equipment. Now, this doesn't just need to be structurally sound because people obviously will be living and walking around and moving in these containers, but it also needs to be strong enough for a crane to pick up and move into place. And that is super important because you don't want this thing falling or ripping apart when it's 20 or 30 feet up in the air. So the steps to do this were pretty straightforward. The first step was to remove the marine plywood floor, which we will be using as the main floor once we're all said and done. I'll talk about how I'm gonna do the insulation and everything later on in another video. And you get it out of the way so we can do our work. Now these screws here that holds in the marine plywood floor are a pain to get out, and it stripped at least half a dozen of my bits. The real tip here for anybody when you're working with containers is use a torch and heat it up at the cross beam underneath that it's screwed into. This makes it hotter, and it obviously when thing heats up, it expands and you can then back out the screw. Now, if you can't get underneath, heat up the screw itself, which in turn will heat up the cross beam, and then put an ice cube on top of the screw to have it rapidly cool down and then back out the screw. It's a nice little hack my welder Cody came up with, and it actually works brilliantly and got all the difficult screws out. The next step was to work from the bottom up. We measured everything twice and then we cut once because we're dealing with very expensive steel that's not very forgiving. We had to cut it and then we put it in place, and we used a floor jack to help us because this thing is heavy. I'm estimating it was probably about 80 to 100 pounds. And that 3-ton floor jack allows it to sit in place, and we just kind of have to wiggle and shenanigans it. I don't know if that's a word, shenanigans it. Wiggle it and move it into place to make sure that it's right where we want it as we weld it to where exactly we want it. Now you can see here everything that we're using is 4" by 4" by 1/4" thick tube steel. Now engineers like to play it super safe, and they like to over-engineer everything just to save their butts, and this is no different. This thing is gonna be far stronger than any shipping container coming out of a yard. You can literally drive on top of this or lift cars with this thing, and it will hold up just fine. Now once the base is in and welded, we start working on the verticals. And then ultimately the header beam that connects everything together, including the top container rails, which are here and the most important thing, because that's where we'll be connecting the D-rings for the crane to latch into. Now this was frustrating and challenging to fit, and due to the tightness of everything and the fact that the beam was incredibly heavy, and Cody and I had to lift it up on some ladders. Then comes the hard part for the welder. The most time-consuming part is for him to do the stitch welding. So for the engineering plans, they called out stitch welding, which means that he does a weld every 6 inches that's 2 inches long. And there's a couple of areas that it wasn't completely flush up against the skin of the shipping container, so it took some time to build the layers and get it welded properly. At the end of the day though, well, technically 3 days, we were done with the first container. We had the first 20-foot container done, and we moved to the second one, moving all of our knowledge. And this is one thing in construction that you will always find is once you do things once, twice, even 3 times, it gets substantially faster for you. So the second container only took us roughly half the time, maybe even faster than that. We were done with it within a day or maybe a little bit over a day versus 3. Which is really nice. And then the last thing that we had to do is prep it for the crane, which was coming the next day, to lift it up and set them in place. And so we use these big old fat D-rings, and we weld that to the rail on the top, which is now welded to that picture frame of steel on the inside. And then voila, we've got 2 20-foot high cube containers that nobody can get. Now we left it open, as you can see. I'm gonna stick frame that out because we are gonna be putting windows and doors into these areas. It actually worked out in our favor. We don't have to cut through metal, and we were able to get 2 20-foot high cube containers for a cheaper price than buying them brand new. Now if you guys got questions, throw me a comment down below, and then you guys can follow me on my Instagram right here for the project. You guys can see that I've already set them, and I'm already starting to work on the inside for those who are following already. And as always, if you guys want to talk to me or set up a session to go over real estate, or even building a container home, a glam site, or getting into short-term rentals, buying land, anything like that at all, hit me up down below. I've got details for setting up a consultation session with me. I love you all. See you guys in the next video. Peace out.